15% of men under the age of 30 now say that they don't have a single friend. And that was just 3%.
A single friend at all?
No.
I'd love to talk about the term toxic masculinity, because I don't think it's done anybody any favors.
In drug poisoning deaths among men since 2001, we've lost the same as the number of men we lost in World War II.
Lower earnings from men result in less marriage.
Wages are the same today as they were in 1979.
You've mentioned that men are often treated as malfunctioning women.
Like, so many people just don't even want to confront the fact. They think politically that's not acceptable, and that's just get us into a horrible position. I'm really worried about that.
Well, you've said we're in a crisis of male inequality, and you've highlighted in your work how society often overlooks men's struggles. And even saying that, I've got this little like itch in the back of my head where I go, now I'm going to get a lot of emails just about this particular thing. And 'cause usually when we're talking about a gender gap, we're talking about the gap that women face. So, you know, it's kind of a brave move for you to have even written about this. I would imagine there were a couple of publishers that were like, how about writing about AI like everybody else? What do you think?
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Because you think, this is going to be difficult. So you don't have the conversation, you don't write the book, you don't do this podcast, because you know that merely raising the fact that there are real problems facing some boys and men somehow marks you out as a misogynist, right? You've gone over to the dark, you've red pilled, you've gone to the dark side, you've turned against women, etc. And it's just such bullshit, honestly, that we can't think two thoughts at once, that we're not allowed to simultaneously care about what's happening with women, promote women, do the best for our daughters, etc. And also think, wait, why are we losing 40,000 men a year to suicide? Why are male why are male wages flat? Why? What's for those without a college degree? Like what's going on here? In the end, I just think the data's clear. A lot of boys and men struggling, especially those who are from poorer backgrounds. And that if we don't talk about it, those problems can turn into grievances. If they're neglected, they turn into grievance. And then we're in real trouble.
Do you have stats off the top of your head? I know I'm sort of ambushing you here with this, but do you have stats off the top of your head about how men are not doing well?
Yeah, I mean, I run a think tank on boys and men, so it's a reasonable thing to expect me to have a few stats.
I would hope so. I was going to edit around it if you didn't, but I'm glad we don't have to do that.
If I was like, I don't know, then I would be out of a job. So I've mentioned, I think one of the things that troubles me most is the rise in suicide. I mentioned it's 40,000 men a year. It's 4 times as many men as women. And since 2010, the suicide rate among men under 30 has risen by 30%. So it's rising fastest now among young men. And I'm really worried about that. I'm worried relatedly about drug poisoning. So the rise in drug poisoning deaths among men this century has been huge.
Drug poisoning. Sorry to interrupt. Drug
suicide.
Poisoning, is that overdosing?
No,
unintentionally. What is drug poisoning?
It's unintentional. So it's when someone's dying of a quotes accidental cause. So that could be like car crash, could be drowning, but drug poisoning is the biggest one now for men. And so there's no evidence that it was deliberate. This is not a suicide, or at least marked as a suicide. This is an accidental overdose. Very often it's because something's laced now. Right, a lot of fentanyl. Also, frankly, it's quite often because they're on their own, so there's no one to resuscitate if something goes wrong or there's something in the drug that you weren't expecting. So we just did a report showing that the rise in drug poisoning deaths among men since 2001 means that we've lost about an extra 400,000 men in that time period. So the increase is the equivalent of 400,000 men. And for those who like their stats, that's the same as the number of men we lost in World War II.
Yeah, that's striking.
That's a big number. That's like so we've lost a world war's worth of men since 2001 from the increase in drug poisoning deaths alone.
That's incredible.
So you've got this whole mental health issue. Now, that's not to say, back to what we were a minute ago, there are huge issues around mental health, especially for teen girls, right, which a lot of people talking about. So it's simultaneously true that we've got this crisis in male suicide, especially among young men, including kind of teen boys. And it's true that we're seeing really spiking rates of anxiety among young girls and young women, I should say, and issues around self-harm and also attempted suicide and suicidal thoughts among young women, right? So the mental health crisis is playing out equally, but differently for young men and young women. And then in the labor market, like men without a 4-year college degree, who are the ones doing worse, their wages are the same today as they were in 1979.
Oh, wow.
So that's nearly half a century of no wage growth. That's an extraordinary fact that just, how can, and actually people from low income backgrounds, they're doing worse than their fathers, which is really hard. That's hard to swallow, being economically actually kind of poorer than your father is. And then in education system, a lot of this is because of education. And so if you look at high school, huge gender gaps in high school now. The top 10% of students in high school, if you just look at that top 10%, there are 2 girls for every boy. So there are twice as many girls as boys graduating top of their class from high school. And the gap in higher education now, college campuses, is about 60-40 female-male, which is for a really good reason, more women going to college, and for a really bad reason, fewer men going to college. But that gap, just to put a point on it, that gender gap in college is bigger than the gender gap we had in the 1970s, but the other way around.
I see.
So,
wow.
Right. It was just a bit less than 60-40 in favor of men, if you like, in the early 70s. And it's now 60-40 in favor of women. So we've reversed the gender gap in colleges now. And it wouldn't matter if like the men who weren't going to college were doing great, but as I've just suggested, they're not doing great. So there's a lot of reasons to be worried about what's happening to our men and our boys.
Yeah, it would be different if it was like, hey, most men are just going to trade school, but they're still making 6 figures. There's a lot of plumbers, electricians, and other experts.
And that's kind of a myth. That's kind of what people say, and that's just not true anymore, by and large.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping was true, I guess. When I read about the statistics for college, I thought, oh, well, maybe more men are just going to learning to be, what is it called, getting apprenticeships or something like that. Yeah, that's not the case.
I mean, it was probably true for their dads, actually. Like, it might well have been true that their dad could get a good trade job or a factory job or a job in the mine or whatever without having to go to college. But that's just much less true now. And then I'll say one more thing, which is related. I should have said this before, but about the mental health isolation thing. There's a lot of work right now about growing social isolation and loneliness. And that's true, across the board. But it's particularly true for young men. So Dan Cox is a researcher at the American Enterprise Institute, and he shows that 15% of men under the age of 30 now say that they don't have a single friend. And that was just 3%.
A single friend at all?
No.
Does that mean
they're a friend,
even online? Or like they just mean no real life friends? No friends at all?
It doesn't distinguish between a just like, do you have a friend? And so the isolation of a lot of men now. And so what's happening is that like the men who are struggling in school struggle at work. They struggle around friendship. They might struggle to form a family. Like they struggle, like most men in their under the age of 30 are not dating. Most women under the age of 30 are dating. It's partly because they're dating older men.
40-year-old guys, but whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's what the 40-year-old guys are hoping anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of overlapping problems, but I think underneath it all, there's just this sense among a lot of young men, which is just figuring out how to navigate this new world, a world which has seen a significant increase in gender equality, or women are no longer economically dependent on men in the way that they were. Right? It's a good thing now that 40% of breadwinners in the US are women. That's just quadrupling in the last few decades. So we've just seen this huge change in the way that men and women relate to each other economically. The idea that the breadwinner, right? You're going to be the breadwinner. And so, and women needed to marry somebody or be with somebody because, right, they needed bread, right? But that's not true anymore. And that's a wonderful, amazing, liberating thing. But if we allow ourselves to say that even good things can sometimes have some difficult byproduct, that's left a lot of men kind of trying to figure out who they are, and I think a lot of men are ending up in our current culture feeling a bit more than a bit lost.
I can see that. It seems like women's role in the family, in the household, has expanded to provider, of course, as well as for caring for children. Men's role has kind of not necessarily expanded similarly to also caring for children. Look, obviously, there's stay-at-home dads. You don't have to email me and tell me you take care of your kids. I get it. But it's not quite the same, probably not quite the same scale.
Nothing like the same scale. I think actually, I really like that word, expansive. So what's happened is that we have wonderfully and incompletely still, but expanded the role of women, right? That you can be a mom, you can be a wife, you can also be a CEO, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a fighter pilot. Amazing. But with men, what we've taken is that old script, right, breadwinner, provider, and that's kind of gone away for this good, but we haven't really replaced it. We haven't expanded the role of men. And so there's this horrible lag now, I think, between this idea of what a man is supposed to be and what we're supposed to do, and who we're supposed to be, and what the reality is now of the economy. And so it's happened pretty fast. And I think a lot of people are still reeling from it, especially a lot of men. And that makes them very vulnerable to someone coming along saying, yeah, remember the old days when men were men and women were women and everyone knew their place and things worked. That's a very appealing message to men who are currently like, I don't know what to do. And worse, sometimes they know what not to do. Right? They know that they're not a long list of things not to do, mostly good thing, right? And don't mansplain, don't be toxic, etc. Good, that's good, but not really a very clear list of things they should do.
It's not a very actionable game plan. Yeah, and we'll get to toxic masculinity later, whatever that means. But there's this evolving masculinity, but it's like you have to have your masculinity has to evolve. Okay, tell me what that means. Oh gosh, I don't know. Figure it out, bro. And
exactly.
Good luck out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just improvise. Everyone's improvising.
Right. Yeah. And we're really not doing a great job of, I think, leading. Well, those of us that are trying are also overshadowed by, grifters who are like, oh, I can come in and take advantage of this. I want to talk more about that in a bit. But you've mentioned that men are often treated as malfunctioning women, essentially. Can you explain what this means? I love that idea, that concept.
Yeah, I think it's particularly true probably in classrooms, right, in schools, but then we can broaden it out, which is like if you have this kind of default idea of like, this is how to behave, right? You should sit still and, study harder and remember your shoes, etc. Like, which, because girls are more mature than boys on average, they're just a bit better at that. And then you sort of say, well, that's how you're supposed to be. And then you say, well, the boys aren't like that. And so you're like, so they're basically a malfunctioning girl. And I think a good definition of a society that's a patriarchy is one where you sort of take male ways of acting and being in the world and then judge women against that, right? And just say, well, why aren't women more like men, right? Like, I'm old enough to remember when it was a big thing that women had to wear shoulder pads and learn to deepen their voice and stand in a funny way and be more, and assertiveness training was, in the 80s. Yeah,
oh,
huge
gosh.
thing.
I was a little bit young then. That sounds so ridiculous.
But now, Margaret Thatcher had to have voice training to kind of lower her voice and all that. So because the idea was basically if women wanted to succeed, they had to become like men. Right, they had to look literally shoulder pads. Think about shoulder pads. What's that doing? It's taking a female physique and it's saying you have to look like a male. That's obviously terrible, and quite rightly, mostly said that's absolute BS. Like we should change our workplace cultures. We shouldn't ask women to stop being women so that they can be CEO. We should just say women can be CEOs as women, right? Not as pretend men. But also the other way around. You don't want to have classrooms or societies where it's like unless you're behaving in a stereotypically female way, sitting still, expressing your emotions in a more stereotypically female way, or whatever it is, right? If you're just a little bit acting, then there's something wrong with you that way around as well. We just have to create a where we're not judging one against the behaviors of the other.
This explains so much of the problems that I had in school. I mean, I've got 2 kids now. One's 5. My boy is 5.5. My daughter is 3. And I will tell you right now, my daughter's probably more ready for school than my son. Or at least they're close at the same, and he's 2.5 years older than her, almost twice as old. Yeah. And it's crazy. We'll say, okay, put on your socks and shoes and put your jacket on, and my 3-year-old daughter will have a little bit of trouble just physically putting it on, and then she'll be by the door, and my son will be playing with Matchbox cars, and it's like, hello, we told you to put your socks and shoes on, and then 10 minutes later, he's got one sock on, and he's looking for a snack, and it's like, what is wrong with you? Right?
What is wrong with you? And actually, I bet you, I'll ask you this question, like, have you ever had the thought, I wish you were a bit more like your sister?
I mean, in certain respects, yes, but also I can really relate to this because as a kid, I was the exact same way, and I thought I mean, they were like, oh, he's got attention deficit disorder and all these things, and it just turns out that okay, maybe that's true, but also it just turns out I was a boy. Hello, all the boys were like that.
That's right. There's a simpler diagnosis.
Yes,
it's a boy. I mean, I got to tell you, I have 3 boys. They're grown now, and I used to think, I wish you were more like your sister.
Yeah.
And they didn't have a sister. I made one up. I had an imaginary sister that I could compare them to, because I just, I had these friends who had girls, and it was just, and I do think as parents sometimes, and teachers and society, is that we can fall into the trap of either elevating, like, this is a male behavior and judging girls and women against that, but all the other way around. Right, just saying, and you roll your eyes a little bit at the boy, and so say, as you just said, what's wrong with you? And I did that with mine, and I really regret it. I think I really lacked a lot of empathy around that.
I have to just realize that he's so young that I'm essentially his external prefrontal cortex that's operating outside of his body, right?
I do. And by the way, you'll have that for 10 years, Jordan, at least.
At least. Maybe 20 more years. I don't know when they finished developing that thing. Mine took a while.
It is about 20 years.
It's like my daughter will say something like, Jaden will be standing on the picnic table and she'll go, "That's dangerous." And he's like, "I'm going to try to fly." And I'm like, no. Listen to your sister on this one. I don't think this is going to work out the way you think it's going to work out, right? And it's just like constantly monitoring them. And then he'll say, "That's dangerous." And then he'll just do it anyway. And I'm like, that's not the point we're trying to bring across. But I remember when I was younger, my friend Katie was a really good student, and they gave us these student homework books, and you would write the subject and write what you had to do in the lines next to it and write when it was due. And I would ask my friend Katie, "How do you remember to look at that when you have homework?" And she goes, "When I come home, I just look at it." And I go, "How do you remember to write down what you need?" And she goes, "When the teacher's telling you to do it, you write it then." And I go, "But then, so then you go home and then you pull this out and you read it and then you do your homework?" Because I couldn't get all those steps. That was not happening. She's like, "Idiot. All you do is write it down and then you do it when you get home." And that was impossible for me to do. I didn't even get that until towards the end of high school.
So many steps. If you think about what it takes to get your homework in, right? You have to be in class when it's set. You have to be paying attention when it's set. You have to make some kind of note, like your friend, write it down. You then have to remember later to look at your notes, and then be able to read your notes. And then you have to, having seen your notes, decide to do the homework rather than what you'd rather do. And then this is the one, Jordan, that gets me. Lastly, if you've actually gone through all those steps and managed to do your homework, small miracle, you have to turn it in.
That's right.
You have to remember to turn it in.
That's right.
I mean, with my boys, like, even if they made it through all those, they'd come home and I'd say, "Did you turn in your chemistry homework?" And they went, "Oh, no, I forgot."
Yep. Yeah, that sounds about right. And even if the teacher's like, "Bring your homework up," I'd just be sitting there staring at the wall. And then it's like, "Did you turn in your homework?" "Oh, I don't know. It's like, where was I? I don't know.
I know.
But that gap widened all the way, seemingly, for me anyway, widened all the way through school. In a lot of the girls that I studied with in high school, it wasn't that they were smarter than all the guys, it's that they were organized in a way that now I see with my wife and I is like still there.
But it doesn't go away completely. But it's actually, one of the things I find really interesting is that on GPA, I mentioned a minute ago, right, there's this massive gender gap on GPA, right? Girls just have much better grades than boys in high school, but there isn't on SAT scores. Right. If anything, right, there's boys are a bit more clustered at the bottom and at the top, but basically there's like huge gender gap on grades, but not really a big gender gap on tests. So I think what that tells you is exactly what you just said. Like, it's not that girls are smarter than boys, or the other way around, in case we still have to say that. Right. Hopefully people trust us enough by now. Right. But what girls are really good at is turning their homework in. And that's what gets you a higher grade. Like, getting a good grade in your class is only very slightly about, smarts. It's about organization. It's about discipline. It's about paying attention. It's about all that stuff. And, like, girls just get that stuff much earlier. And the biggest gap, actually, I think, is kind of in early adolescence. It is those late middle high school, early high school years where the girls hit puberty earlier. They grow, their brains grow. They just grow up. They become like girls become young adults a year or two earlier than boys do, right? That's just a fact. Anyone that's seen kids growing up knows that. But our education system doesn't really reflect that. It's one of the reasons I'm quite keen on this idea of starting boys in school a year later. So it just gives them a year to catch up.
We've done this with my son. We put him in pre-K, preschool, then pre-K, and we're like, okay, he's finally ready for kindergarten. So we held him back because he was on the age line, and now we're like, oh God, that was such a good idea. I mean, it was just so dang necessary. Meanwhile, my wife's like, do we need to hold Juniper back? I don't know. And it's hard to tell because she's 3, but she is so much more ready than like I said, even than Jaden is at 5 for school. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Starting boys a year later probably wouldn't have been a bad idea. I didn't even think about just starting everyone later.
Just as a default, a lot of private schools kind of do it. Like say to the parents if they've got boys, especially if they're summer-born boys, they're like, yeah, I think we should probably wait with him. A lot of richer parents are kind of doing it. But I think it should be a choice for parents wherever their kids are at school.
What about investing more in trade schools, to go back to what we were talking about at the top of the show? It seems like, I went to college because my parents were like, if you don't go to college, you're never going to get a good job. That was sort of like peak 90s parental wisdom. And from two parents who were the first in their families to go to college, I think, or one of the first. So that made sense, but I also kind of didn't totally need to do that. I ended up at what you might call a trade school anyway because I became a lawyer, but it's not quite the same thing that people are envisioning.
Different kind of trade.
Yeah. But I'm
sorry to hear that. You were downwardly mobile that way, Jordan.
I totally. It's funny. I always say I was painted into a corner, and I did what a lot of people do when they're backed. Have no other options and became a lawyer. And it's true. It's like a catch-all for college overachievers that are like, I have no idea what to do with my life. They just go to law school. But a lot of when I was in Germany, there were different high schools for people who didn't show like they were going to go to college, and then they would go to a trade school. And by the time they were, I think, 18, they were pretty much ready to go be a tool and die maker or a railroad track repair person or a engineer of some kind. And then you could go to college, but that was like you were going to be academic and you were going to go to a professional level of something. But there was even in Yugoslavia, they had a high school just for people who were going to be police officers. It was like, this is where you go to high school, and then you get out and you're a cop.
Yeah.
It's a totally different thing than we have here, where it's like, oh, if you can make it, you can go to college, and if you can't, well, I'll take fries with that. It's like we really just give up on those people a lot of the time.
So I think, like, on the one hand, like, I don't want to in any way discourage people from going to college. It's like, especially people like who maybe come from, maybe they don't have parents like yours who say you have to go to college. They might have parents who are like, oh, college isn't worth it. And actually, this kid's really smart and could do very well at college, especially boys right now. But on the other hand, I think you're right that the US just doesn't do very well on that trade school stuff, the vocational stuff. And actually, there's one good reason for that, which is this, although I think it's out of date, which is a fear of tracking. So there's a history in the US where we would have more vocational stuff in high school, but it would only be like the poor kids and very often the black kids who'd be put on that track, right? So it's like the biases about class and race really kicked in, right? And so people are very, very concerned that if you introduce like vocational tracks like they have in Germany and Scandinavia, that it'll be the kind of poorer kids and probably the kids of color who end up on those tracks. So I get that fear. But on the other hand, it's not like our high schools are serving those kids amazingly well now, right? And I think that the fear of that is now getting in the way of progress and investing much more in it. Like one of the things I looked at was technical high schools, which are like just much more vocational high school. And boys do really well at those schools.
My dad went to one of those in Detroit.
They're very sort of male friendly, and some of them go to college and some of them don't. But the point is they just get a better high school education. And right now, a lot of boys just aren't getting good high school education. So let's start there. And there's a bit of a, I mean, from the UK, as you know, but there's a sort of snobbery in the US about trade school and apprenticeships, and like it's right. People just sort of really think it's lesser, and that's just not true in Europe in the same way.
I've been trying to pop that bubble for years on this show, where Mike Rowe, you know Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs?
Yeah.
So he used to get really upset because people would say, oh, hey, Mike, I always watch your show with my son, and I tell him this is what happens when you don't stay in school. And Mike's like, oh, you mean the people that bring electricity to everyone in the city are not as good as you? What are you again, like a CPA? Like, go F yourself, pal. And it's just like, what do you mean this is what happens when you don't stay in school? You get a pension? You get outside every day? I mean,
you get to work outside, work with your hands, helping people.
It's just such an offensive notion that somebody who runs the railroad where you live is not as good as you because you spent more time indoors in school. It's ridiculous.
I mean, actually, one of the jobs that we have a real shortage for now is linemen. The people are going to go and fix the power lines, right? I live in East Tennessee when I'm at home, and we had when Helene came through, it just like wiped out. And then you just saw these guys, and it was mostly guys. There are some women, but like mostly guys who were just. It's one of the most dangerous occupations. I think it's in the top 10 who are getting up there on these, taking the old ones down, putting the new ones up. They're up there with electricity. They're up kind of wires, so that I could get my power back, right? And I just anybody who looks down their nose at someone doing that kind of work, I'm sorry, that person is just an asshole.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
And we've just lost respect. And it's easy to say, but then, okay, well, let's pass the apprenticeship bill. Let's have some technical high schools. The problem in the US, like this, the turning away from like apprenticeships, vocational, all the stuff we just talked about, it's bad for everyone, but it's particularly bad for boys and men, because that is a way of learning that just seems to be a bit more male friendly as opposed to the normal classroom. So it's great. Let's do more of that.
Right. So basically, the jobs that many men would be well suited to do we don't want to do them because we don't want to have people go, couldn't make it in the academic world, eh? And it's like, well, no, I actually kind of wanted this job, you snobby SOB, right? I understand that. Yeah. You've talked before about heel jobs. I've never actually heard the term heel jobs. I guess it's a term that's sort of being contrasted with STEM jobs. Yeah. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so it stands for health, education, administration, and literacy. So the kinds of jobs that are in those fields or need those skills. And it's something that actually I came up with as a way to think about this alternative. And whilst it is obviously true that, doing the jobs we just talked about, linemen, plumbing, HVAC, driving, road, amazing jobs, and we should, and we still need a lot of people in those jobs.
I just paid my HVAC guy the price of a small sedan. So yeah, he's not poor. This guy's
They're making
doing
good
fine.
money. I mean, yeah. They've gone to, you have to get trained to do that stuff, and they're really good. And but there's also a lot of job growth now in the health sector. Like in education, we have this, shortage of teachers, shortage now of kind of people, healthcare. And I'm really worried about the fact that a lot of people just don't see those as jobs that men should do. And I just completely disagree. My son just became a 5th grade teacher in Baltimore City.
Oh, wow. Whoa, in Baltimore?
Yeah.
Had he been to Baltimore before?
Yeah, actually, my wife's from Baltimore, and my godson lives there, and so we have good family. Yeah, it can be a tough neighborhood, man. It's a challenging. Yeah, actually, I'm just rewatching The Wire, and now I'm like, oh wait, that's where he teaches. I was sort of recognizing some of it, but he's like one of very few, like almost no male teachers. And I just think that's a huge problem. Like the share of male teachers was 33% in the 80s. It's now 23% and falling. So we're just cratering the share of men in the classroom, and that's bad for 3 reasons. 1, we need more teachers. 2, they're pretty good jobs. Then the pay's going up. They're obviously you have to get educated, but they're much better jobs than people I think probably realize. And 3, most importantly, I want the boys in the classroom to see men showing that education is a thing that men do, right? And the only way kids believe, one of the things I believe as a parent, and now as a sort of policy one, more than anything else probably is, people believe their eyes, not their ears.
Yeah.
And if they see it, they see a guy like my English teacher, like you. I struggled a bit in school, and I was in remedial English and language, and then Mr. Wyatt, the English teacher, God, he was a miserable old sod, as we say, where I come from. He was a Korean War veteran, which might explain why he was miserable. Yep. But he taught us poetry, and it was the first time I thought, really? This is the thing guys do? That guys can get into this writing poetry thing changed my life. And I'm just going to say, it would not have been the same if it wasn't a guy. And I think that's okay. Just as a woman teaching science can be a huge role model for girls, etc. Just guys in the classroom, guys coaching the space. Right? Just we need men in these classrooms and in these boys' lives.
That's a really good point. I was never good at languages, and we had to memorize these verb tables and stuff like that. But then we had Mr. Wilson, and he was not only the football coach, but he was also the Spanish teacher and the French teacher in, I think, middle school for me. So it became like, oh, you don't have to be some kind of, a woman or some kind of weenie academic guy to be able to speak French or Spanish. And because I even remember my friends saying, oh, languages are for girls, yes. And which is such a weird thing to say.
I know, but it happens.
What makes it for girls?
It's so weird because I actually think things get coded quite quickly, right? I think, especially among kids, right? They code that as that's not for someone like me, right? So they think, oh, well, girls do that or boys do that, or whatever. They're very sensitive to that. And especially as adolescents, I think they're very sensitive to like going against the grain and all that. And so it's a huge problem. If they don't see male teachers, of course, they won't think that teaching is a job for men. That's like blindingly obvious.
You know, another weird thing that got coded wrong, in my opinion, is study abroad. I largely, whenever I talk about this, it's almost always women doing it, which blows my mind, because when I was an exchange student in the 90s, there were more women than men doing it, but I just thought that was random chance. It turns out, I looked this up, women are much more likely to study abroad, even now.
Twice as likely.
Yeah.
Twice as likely.
Affects, I assume that affects hiring, because that's been one of the most standout things on my resume since 1998.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you get the data we were talking about earlier around education, test scores, GPA, etc. That's all interesting, but in some ways these other measures are more revealing, right? Because more like twice as likely to study abroad, women and men, twice as likely to do student government, twice as likely to join AmeriCorps, twice as likely to join the Peace Corps. Right, so all of those things, there are twice as many women as doing men, and it's not obvious why. Right, you could explain GPA with the school and stuff, but actually, it's really tough to. And when I looked at this study abroad thing, because I found the same thing as you, that like it's just much more female now. You think that's kind of weird, and you think, oh well, maybe it's because the subjects, right? Because maybe women are doing like languages or history, right? But actually, that's not true. It's like even within subjects, you get that gap, right? So it's not like you can't. So there's just something. And when people have done research on it, it's just like the girls, young women at that point, of course, they just seem to have a bit more ambition, a bit more aspiration, a bit more adventure about them. And so there's this weird counterintuitive thing where it's supposed to be the guys who are like out there adventuring and going west. It's flipped now. It's the other way around.
You know what? The only thing that occurred to me, that I tried so hard to figure this out just based on my own personal experience, which is all anecdotal, but whatever. When I told everyone I was going to be an exchange student and go abroad, one, it was a woman's idea, my girlfriend at the time. It was her idea for me to do this in the first place, kind of. I mean, she's the one who encouraged it the most when I brought it up. She gave me the idea originally. All of my female friends were like, that's going to be amazing. Let me help you pick the country that you go to. Let's do pros and cons. And all my buddies, my guy friends, were like, man, why are you going to leave when you're going to be a senior? It's going to be awesome. We're going to run the whole school. And it was like, who cares? Run the whole school. I'm going to Europe for a year. What are you talking about? Run the school. Who cares? That's the dumbest possible, smallest thinking goal I could ever think of. And all the women were like, oh, I'm so jealous you don't have to be here next year. That's going to be amazing. So I was encouraged by my female friends to pack up and go somewhere. And my guy friends they all thought I was just nuts for leaving. Like, you have a gym here. What more could you want? You know, it's just total opposite.
They have gyms in Europe, although not as many. But it's interesting because your experience is exactly what the research shows, which is that actually the effects of peers on men were to make them less likely to go. Peers were discouraging of studying abroad, whereas female, exactly your experience. Although I have to ask this question: when your girlfriend suggests that you go abroad for a year, could she be saying something else? Was that just a way of breaking up with you?
So she was moving to Norway to go to boarding school. So that was already happening. That was like, hey, by the way.
So she wanted to get you closer. So it's the opposite. Okay.
Sure, maybe. I don't think she cared anymore. But then I said, oh, I'm so jealous that you're leaving, kind of the same thing that most of the women were saying to me. And then I said, all my friends, we're getting in trouble. They're getting in more trouble. They're doing way more drugs than I'm kind of comfortable with. I don't want to sit around drinking all day in Russ's basement. This is getting old, and we're only juniors. And she's like, why don't you become an exchange student like Jane? That was a girl from Norway that was in our class. And I said, that would be cool. How do you do that? She goes, oh, I have a brochure sitting on my coffee table right now. Next time you come over, I'll give it to you, or I'll bring it over to your house. And I just read this thing and looked at every country, and I was like, wanted to go. The world just opened up right before my eyes when I saw this brochure. And she was like, you have to do it. And I said, it's expensive. And she's like, oh, forget it. Just convince I'll help you. My mom will help you convince your parents. And that she did. Her mom was a senator. So she was like, I'm calling your parents and telling them why this is important for you to do. And they believed her. So that's how I ended up an exchange student. A little. But, as
you say, like it's great for the resume. It's great experience. Yeah. But I think it's also interesting. Like girls, young women are more like to move away from home, right? So there's more. We're about to produce some research showing that like half the counties in the US now have got more men than women in them, because the women have moved away to the cities to get jobs and have more opportunities, and so obviously they go away to college, and so women are now more mobile geographically than women as well. So you've got this situation where they're also more likely to leave home, buy their own home, move to a different place, go to college, study abroad, volunteer. And so there's all of these things that are just like skewing much more female now. And that's great, of course, that women are doing all those things, but it's not great that men aren't doing those things. And so I think we've really got to ask ourselves the question is like, what's happening with our guys now, so many of our young men, where they're just not feeling that same level of motivation and aspiration as young women, right? We don't want it the other way. We don't want to go back to a world where women were discouraged from doing it. Of course not. But we should worry when we see gender gaps like that, 2 to 1, twice as like we should at least be asking the question, like, why is that happening? Is that good? But the trouble is, back to where we started, like so many people just don't even want to confront the fact that this could be an area where we should be more worried about men than women. They just can't do that because they think politically that's not acceptable, and that's just get us into a horrible position.
Another thing I'm kind of worried about, I know we just got done talking about how great the trades are, but isn't automation replacing a lot of what was traditionally men's work? I know Uncle Frank's spit takes at the dinner table say that it's because the whole generation got lazy, but that's not really what's happening, right?
No, the main reason why you saw this impact on men's jobs was exactly that. It was automation, big one, but also free trade. So as we saw kind of like the competition. And so I can't remember the exact numbers, but there's this great, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the federal government. They have this measure of like jobs that require you to lift a certain amount of weight. I don't know what it is, like where you have to lift like 50 pounds more than 10 times a day or the equivalent.
I know flight attendants have that, but that's because they got to be able to put people's luggage in the overhead thing.
That's true. I hadn't thought of that. I bet you they still count.
I'm sure they do. Yeah. I've heard them say that to me because I'm like, oh, isn't that heavy? And she's like, we literally have to be able to do this for our job or we can't work.
It's probably like being a coal miner or something in that. I hadn't. God, that's really interesting. I never thought about the stewards having to do that and stewardesses doing that. But the number of jobs that require that sort of physical strength has gone from something like 30% to like 10% and falling. Like it's single figures now. And so those sort of physical strength jobs have either been replaced by automation, or they've gone somewhere where the labor is cheaper. And so that's been a big cause of this decline in male employment and male wages. I think actually AI is going to be very different. I actually think that AI might hit some women's jobs a bit more than men's jobs.
Well, it's coming for us lawyers. I know that. All the lawyers are like, oh, it's never going to be able to do. And I'm like, let me stop you right there. Everything that you can do, unless you're like a partner in a very specialized area of law, it can already do that. You just don't know how it works.
That's right. If there's one profession that should get wiped out by AI, it is law.
It is. Yeah. Like it can't stand up at trial and argue for your client, but that's not what you do. You manage a spreadsheet. Yeah. One thing I saw in your work that I thought was just kind of a weird aside, I'm so curious about, you said, and I may be paraphrasing here, men and women's grip strength is now largely the same, which is such a weird, first of all, who's measuring this across generations? That's such a bizarre metric weird to even exist.
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess that I looked at some other studies since, and that hasn't replicated very well.
Okay, because I thought that cannot be just genetically from testosterone levels. That just can't be true. But what do I know?
It is true that like younger men are actually like less strong than men used to be at their age.
Sure.
And that women have gotten stronger, especially some women kind of in their 30s and 40s. And so you can easily imagine a situation where like 30, 40 years ago, like your mum didn't have amazing grip strength and your friends did. And now you can imagine a situation where your mom is going to like, you know, Pilates and CrossFit, right? Or your wife, or
exactly.
And actually the boy is like, he's just got tendonitis from gaming or whatever, and is not like, so that is true. That is true that the gap has narrowed, but the gap hasn't closed completely in the way that one study. It was one of those. I'll confess to you, it's one of those studies. I just thought like that was so weird that I put it in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought, what a strange thing to even be measuring.
But it's interesting, like it is capturing something important. I don't know if you know Jonathan Haidt's work.
He's been on the show a few times.
Yeah, so John's got this great stat where he says that he shows now the average 15-year-old boy is less likely to break his arm than the average 50-year-old man. And that
just because they're
inside
all day doing nothing?
Yeah. So it used to be that 15-year-old boys would like fall out of a tree or they'd be out skateboarding or biking or whatever. And so they'd fall over and break their arm like most of us did. And for the 50-year-old men were not doing that. Whereas now, like the dads are all kind of like broing out on their mountain bikes or whatever. And the sons are inside.
It's true. Yeah. I certainly now at age 45 am doing way more than I did even as a teenager. I mean, friends of mine are like, oh, remember when you were a kid and this happened? And I was like, man, I must have been even more of an indoor kid than I thought, because all this stuff's happened to me now that now I'm finally 45 living life. Before then I was kind of, I guess I was an indoor kid.
Well, better late than never.
Better late than never. That's right. I always tell people, I say, I'm in the best shape of my life. They're like, wow, what's your secret? The secret is be in really bad shape for most of your life beforehand. Yeah, that's really the trick.
Start from a really low base. Yeah.
Exactly. The bar is on the floor. It's only up from there.
Yeah.
Do you worry at all that the drop in male employment will result, or maybe even already has resulted in electoral shifts in the United States and in Europe for that matter?
Yeah, I worry generally that when men are struggling economically, and that could be lack of employment, could be lower wages, could be some of these health issues we talked about, right? Actually, one of the things we showed was that for men who are out of work, this is men without a college degree, half of them said that they had some sort of health problem, right? Usually it can be a mental health problem or an addiction problem, whatever. So like health and family life and work, they all go together, right? So you might measure one thing like employment, but actually it's probably capturing a bunch of other things too, like health and motivation and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, there's pretty good evidence that once men become economically vulnerable, they're really struggling, they are much more open to an argument that is a more reactionary argument that basically is we need to go back. This is an argument based on, let's go back to the world that your dad had, right? Let's go back to the world where men were the breadwinners, etc. And you can see how if you're a guy who's just really struggling to find a footing, right? You're not doing well on lots of fronts. You can see how your struggles could actually put you in a position where you are quite open to that sort of politics. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that I'm not at all partisan, but I think without making a partisan point, I think that actually, because it could be a reaction left or right or whatever, I just think that when men aren't doing well, they're just much more politically available in a way. I just saw that, I think, in the last election in the US, is like we saw young men voting, voting right. And I think one of the reasons for that is because they just kind of feel like their concerns are just not being taken seriously on the political left. And they're not wrong about that. And so I think that to some extent, we've all got to take some responsibility for what's happening.
Yeah, I worry that if sort of responsible parties don't address all these issues, that irresponsible people will take advantage of that, and we've seen that throughout history.
That's exactly what happens. I think I think it's basically true that if it's a real problem, right? So you can imagine something's like a made up problem, right? But if it's a real problem, and as you say, like you don't see governments and think tanks and podcasters and media taking that stuff seriously, reporting on it, tackling it, then someone's going to come along and say, hang on. That like one of the things I've noticed is that some of the more reactionary online figures in the sort of men's sphere, what they do is they come along and they say, a lot of men and boys are really struggling. The powers that be are ignoring those, are not paying attention to those problems.
Parentheses, right?
They, the elite, the whatever, right? Thirdly, that's because they've been overrun by woke feminists and they hate men. Fourthly, that's why you should click on my website, download my brochure for how to be a better buffer man or whatever, or vote for me or whatever it is. Right? The problem with that is the first statement is true. Men are struggling. Boys and men are struggling. The second statement, that we're not paying enough attention to those issues, is also true. Right? The third statement, that's because the woke feminists have taken over and hate men, is not true. But you can find a few sound bites. You can make it sound true. And so the problem, the way to address the problem of reactionary figures pointing accurately to the actual problems of boys and men and pointing to the neglect of them is to not neglect them. It's to make them sound crazy. So that if they say they are not paying attention to the male suicide crisis, they are not doing anything about the fact that boys are struggling in school, You can say, what are you talking about? We have whole commissions, we have whole policies around that. What are you talking about? You sound crazy. The trouble is, right now, they don't sound crazy. They sound plausible because we're not doing enough to help boys and men. And that just cedes the political ground to the people who can weaponize it.
Yeah, that we've seen that with the rise of guys like Andrew Tate, for example, or I don't think that's a partisan comment, is it? I think he's just kind of like he's far enough out there that
he's off the reservation.
That's right.
I think. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the term toxic masculinity because I don't think it's done anybody any favors because it basically doesn't mean anything anymore. If it ever did, it doesn't mean anything now to me anyway. I don't even know what people are talking about when they say it. Do they mean that masculinity is toxic? Do they mean that too much of it is toxic, or is it a different variation of masculinity that is toxic? I don't have a clue.
They don't have a clue. What it usually means is that they don't like what you're doing right now.
Yeah, that's all I know. That's all I know is they're trying to throw a label and get me to stop talking. Good luck with that.
Right. No, it's actually, oddly, it used to mean something, right? So before 2016, it was a very academic term, mentioned a few times in footnotes of journals, but no one read about. It was really about how some very violent men had actually just their own mental health issues that were like sociopaths, honestly, for whom their ideas of masculinity had genuinely become entwined with violence and kind of dominance. So it was a really very specific term used in a very precise way in academia. In 2016, it just burst into the mainstream and was suddenly being used for everything. Right. And so suddenly, like, everything was toxic masculinity. And so it became, I think at this point, it's a slur. It also turns men off. Most boys and men, like, I don't think it's very exciting to say to men, you know what, we have a vision for modern masculinity. We could make you not toxic. Right? Those people will say, well, not all masculinity is toxic. It's like, okay, well, tell me some good things about masculinity, though. And they can't do that, right? Because then they fall into the trap of saying that there are some things that are masculine that are good, and they don't want to say that. And so it just ends up being this sort of term that's thrown around. It's become very counterproductive. And the trouble is, you put the word toxic next to the word masculinity, and then you wonder why so many boys have been turned off by that debate. I think it's a problem in itself, but it's also just, I think, a symptom of a broader problem, particularly on the centre left in politics, where just an inability to have a positive story to tell about masculinity. I've really come to believe that too many people, even now, struggle to admit that men are having problems because they think men are the problem. And until we get past that, we're just going to keep losing these men.
What do you think of some of these alt men's movements? Like you mentioned earlier, Redpill. I think you mentioned men going their own way, MGTOW. I don't know if they say that as an acronym or not. But
I think they say MGTOWs. I don't really
it's
know,
awkward.
Yeah.
There's not a really good way to deal with that.
No.
But what do you think of that? First of all, what are those for people who've never heard of this? And what do you make of those?
Yeah, so if you get into the sort of manosphere, men's rights stuff, there's a whole bunch of different issues. So MGTOWs, yes, men going their own way. That's one group. They're basically male separatists. What they're basically saying is, look, the whole system's stacked against you. If you do get a job, you're going to be screwed over. And then if you do get a woman, have a baby with her, she's going to boot you out the moment another guy comes along who's better than you. Then you're going to be on the hook for child support. You basically, the whole system. So basically, they're like, screw all this. They're just kind of rejecting the idea of family, of fatherhood, of marriage, even of work in some cases. So it's a very strong reaction against this sense that like society's rigged against men now. There's a Redpill movement, which is just a broader term for just like men who've basically somehow woken up and realized that the world has turned against them and that there's a kind of progressive feminist worldview now that's sort of taken over, etc. There's incels. Involuntary celibates, who are kind of like men who just can't they can't get a girl, can't get a girlfriend, etc. And so there's a whole bunch of like different groups that are online now. And what I think about that is actually some of them are quite, those groups can be quite supportive, actually, in many cases of those men. But it's also where reaction goes. It's like they feed off each other. They victimize themselves. They find someone else to blame. I think the big problem with those men's rights groups is it's not that they're usually kind of misstating that there are actual problems. It's that they want someone to blame. Mm-hmm. And they find someone to blame in women or in the women's rights movements or in whatever. And the truth is that it is true that boys and men are struggling, but it's no one's to blame, really. It's like no one's deliberately doing it to you. So they actually end up being the least masculine thing of all in many ways, which is victims.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So the whole men's rights movement like pretends to be this kind of super masculine movement, but actually it's like they spend all their time complaining.
Yeah, whining online. Exactly, whining on Reddit.
Which is not very masculine.
You know, for often about these men's movements, I just think, but for the grace of God go I. I was lucky I was born at the right place at the right time in a good family. I got, well, I'll let people decide if I have good genetics based on whoever's watching on YouTube. But, I had luck in the job market, especially with timing. I had luck in business. But if any of those things at any kind of point had gone wrong, I might also easily be blaming women or society for my life not turning out the way that I expected it or wanted it to. So I kind of, in a way, I have real empathy for these guys.
Me too.
They're handling it terribly. It's just the worst way possible, whining online all day.
Right.
But I also I understand how they got there.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do, actually. I think there's a tendency to just dismiss them, right? To just actually, and to dismiss the underlying causes. Because you can think, look, guys, this is not a very healthy response to the challenges you're facing. That's the right answer, right? It is not to say, well, you don't face any challenges. What are you talking about? We live in a patriarchy, and so it's difficult because you don't want to in any way be seen to be like justifying some of these movements. But I'll also say one more thing, which having raised boys myself, they're all in their 20s now, is that actually if boys are largely exposed to very liberal environments, liberal schools, liberal households, there's a good chance they're going to go through a phase. Right, they're going to go through a phase. It might not be Andrew Tate phase. It could be Jordan Peterson phase or a Ben Shapiro. Right? They're going to go through a phase because if all they're hearing is like a very sort of progressive orthodoxy, then they're going to go online and they're going to find it. And so it's almost like an act of rebellion as well. teenage boys especially love being transgressive. And so if all they hear is like progressive orthodox views, right, they're going to transgress against them. And like if you're a 15-year-old boy and you've got a feminist mum, the way to really get under her skin is start telling her, like, I think Andrew Tate's got a lot of really good points, mum.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Then step back, light fuse, watch mum explode.
That's right. That's right. I agree. I think we push people to extremes. A lot of times it's to the right, but it's not always to the right. But we push guys like this to extremes because, like you said, some of what they say is correct. And then we kind of refuse to acknowledge that, which just gets them to dig in their heels more. And it's not that this is a group of guys that want all women to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That's an extreme reaction to stimuli that they're getting it elsewhere. And our mutual friend Ryan Holiday likes to say, it's hard we can't let the crazy people make us crazy people. And that's the exactly algorithms are trying to radicalize you. Political parties are trying to radicalize you. Grifters on the internet are trying to radicalize you. So, like, can we be surprised that some of us get radicalized by the system that is doing that, especially when other things, you get divorced, you lose your kids, then you get laid off. And, of course you're not doing well. Of course you're going to look for a scapegoat. What advice would you give to young men navigating societal expectations and sort of redefining their roles in today's world? I know that's a really broad question, but you're the man for the job.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I am, honestly.
Really?
I'm very proud of my 3 sons, all in their 20s now. So I guess that's probably my best claim to expertise.
Yeah. Look, your kids are functional members of society. Congratulations.
Yeah, they're amazing. I think the first thing is to just acknowledge that if you're struggling, maybe at school or if you're struggling to figure this stuff out, you're not alone. This is a perplexing time to be figuring out how to be a man. It is, right? For all the good reasons we've explained, etc. But and the school system may not be working very well for you. So the first thing is just give yourself a break, right? It's not that there's something wrong with you, right? It's not that you're not masculine enough or too masculine or kind of whatever, right? Don't believe those people online, right? Telling you that there's something wrong with you. That's not true. It is. So first have some empathy, right? For yourself. Second thing is figure out a little bit for yourself, kind of who you want. Don't let someone else give you a script, whether it's me or somebody else. That's why I'm a bit reluctant to talk about this. But I think the third thing I'd say is if you feel good about being a guy, being a boy, being a man, good. Feel okay about that. Feel okay in your skin. Feel okay with your male friends. If there are certain aspects of your behavior that just skew a little bit more male, right? It's good. It's fine. Hang out and have male friends, right? Make sure you've got kind of male friends. Have your crew, have your buddies, have your gang, whatever you want, like to kind of look out for each other. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. And so those are the things like be very thoughtful about you making your friends. Be very thoughtful about kind of having your own script, but letting someone else do it, and don't beat yourself up. And also just, this isn't not something, it's like advice for them, but like it's a direct message to them, which is like, you know, we see you. We care about you. You're precious. You're precious to us. You're precious in our sight. We need you. The tribe needs you. And I do think that we're not good enough at saying that to young men anymore. Like we need you. The tribe needs you. And I think that the contest for the allegiance of young men is always being fought, right? Young men, I think especially, need to feel like part of something bigger than themselves, to be allied to something, whether it's a team or a tribe or whatever. And so let's, you know, find something to ally yourself to, and be unashamed about that. I just saw this, I haven't written this up yet, but I just saw this kind of slightly worrying, disturbing survey, which finds that, you know, people, women especially, are kind of much more suspicious of all male social groups than all female social groups, right? So girls' nights out, girls' trips, girls' groups are like good, but suspicious of male ones. And I think that's a real step backwards.
Boys' trip is you're going to do something and then everyone's
going to...
Yeah.
I get why, but I just think I understand it, but I don't agree with it. And I think if we undermine male solidarity, and we make men feel bad about wanting to hang out with men sometimes, you see the friendship recession I mentioned earlier, and actually we're sort of signaling that maybe there's something bad about being male, and there isn't nothing intrinsically bad about being male. It's kind of awesome being male, right? Wouldn't you say? Do you like being a guy?
I mean, personally, I like it. I don't know if I couldn't handle being a woman, first of all. So it's the only option left on the table.
That's right.
Debatably, I suppose. I have to replay that clip for my wife when I want to go on a boys' trip this summer. Like, hey, I'm sorry, Richard Reeves says that this is.
You could say Doctor, Professor,
that's right.
PhD, Richard Reeves. He says I have to. Sorry,
look, appeal to authority.
Doctor's orders. Doctor's orders.
Doctor's orders. I have to go get drunk in Berlin. I'm sorry. I don't have a choice. What steps can both men and women take to bridge maybe this growing disconnect in modern relationships too? Because this, you know, we just sort of mentioned earlier, we see this all the time in marriage. Men work less when they're not providers. They don't see themselves as providers, so they're working less. Divorce is harder on men psychologically. I read that in your book as well. And lower earnings from men result in less marriage. So it's not just like women are taking off without us. It's like actually everything's kind of getting screwed up now, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah. I mean, it's true that if men are floundering, it's hard for women to flourish. And so it's in everyone's interest to sort of help your partner to flourish. And if it's a man, then he's going to be flourishing more as a man, again, as a woman. And I think that I'm not going to... It's hard for me to kind of advise women. I think that's a kind of... But I will say, like...
You can advise men if you want, just to avoid this landmine that I've set for you.
Well, maybe I will end up talking about women, but because I think the secret probably is just like knowing each of you putting equal effort in and appreciating and respecting the other for the effort that they're putting in, whatever that is. And if there's a bit of a division of labor, either the traditional way or the other way, cool. I was a stay-at-home dad for a while. My wife knew I had the kids. I was on it, right? I was on it. I did that. That was my job, right? So that she could worry about her job. We didn't split every task 50-50. That's insane. It's incredibly inefficient. But we really respected and were appreciative for, like, when she was doing that earning and I was doing the home, or the other way around. I think in the end, that's all we can ask of each other, is that we can kind of look each other in the eye, trust each other that we're kind of working hard, and never roll your eyes. Have you seen that data from the Love Lab about rolling your eyes at each other?
No, but I remember that contempt is the number one indicator of divorce. And rolling your eyes sounds like it's part of that. That's what it is. Yeah, I think that's right. So if you ever find yourself rolling your eyes at each other, then you're in real trouble, because what that indicates is contempt. So lack of respect. And there's an old traditional saying, which is women need to hear that they're loved and men need to hear that they're respected. And I'm going to say there's a grain of truth to that, right? I do not want to stereotype. I do not want to say it's true of everybody.
So, don't fill up my inbox with how dare you make assumptions about everybody. Like, I'm sure, like, men need to hear their love too. But yeah, but it does feel true to me. I just think there's some level kind of which, like, if men don't feel that they're respected by their partners for their efforts, whatever they are, that's really corrosive to them. I think that men, to some extent, for good or ill, do see themselves somewhat reflected in their partner's eyes. And so I do think that, like, as the partner, as kind of woman of a man, like, just recognize that he to some extent is seeing himself through your eyes. And so be very careful about how you look at him and what you say to him. And of course, the same is true the other way around. Of course, all the caveats. But I do worry, it's partly back to this conversation about sort of toxic masculinity, rolling your eyes, boys' trips, etc., which is that there's sometimes in our culture a bit of a tendency to kind of infantilize men now, or to sort of dismiss them, roll our eyes at them, tell them they're mansplaining, put them down a little bit. And I think that that's incredibly unfortunate, and we should make sure that we don't poison our own personal relationships with that kind of dynamic.
I love that, first of all. This is totally a non sequitur, but oh well. I got to say, I'm worried about AI relationships supplanting human ones.
Oh my
Just
God.
Given the changing landscape where women no longer need men as much economically, and men are kind of like, well, if this isn't going to work and I'm not good enough, I'm just going to retreat into the internet. What impacts do you foresee for men moving forward? It's only a matter of time till guys are like, who doesn't give me any crap? My AI girlfriend. And the woman's like, who doesn't cost me money and tell me bad things and make me feel bad because he's emasculated? My AI boyfriend that I can turn off when I go to sleep or whatever. I feel like that's just right around the corner, man.
Well, I think there's a serious point here, and then there's sort of a, maybe it's all serious, but it's interesting, isn't it? Like, it's more discussion of AI girlfriends than AI boyfriends.
That might come first because it's harder to program what women need for an AI boyfriend, whereas AI girlfriend, I think we can all imagine the ingredients that go into that and how simple that might actually be.
Okay, good. So that's your inbox filling up, not mine now.
Yes,
because
I
got you to say it, not me.
That one's on me.
I think but it is interesting because it's like there is a difference. But and actually, so John Haidt, who we talked about before, he's actually written a piece for us, my institute on kind of really worrying that already I think like young men, if they're lost, are particularly susceptible to kind of being hooked by something kind of online, and that's. Think about porn, like even before AI. I think that if the world outside is difficult to navigate, hard dating, etc., is confusing, and the world inside is getting better and better by comparison to what was in the past, I think that's a huge problem. And it's less, for me, it's less of a problem in itself. Maybe like if the guy's got an AI girlfriend, like, I don't know if that's bad in itself. It might be, but I do know that it's bad if it's stopping him going out and meeting actual girls, right? And
it will.
Studying
Trust
abroad,
me.
right?
Trust me.
It's displacing it. It's displacing it, right? And then he gets less skilled at it, which makes it harder for him. And so you have a really downward spiral. But I think on the other hand, the challenge for men is like much more like the AI husband than the AI boyfriend. So I have this friend who just wasn't very good at listening to his wife. Talking about the same thing. She'd come home, she had this problem at work, and she'd come in, I had this problem at work today. It's basically the same problem. This person she didn't like working with, and he was like classically male. It's like, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to fix it? What's the problem here? Let's break this down, and you call this. And she's like, no, I just need to listen. And he's like, over and over. So anyway, so then he persuades her eventually to listen to an AI. So they get, I don't know which AI it was, Claude or something. And he sort of programmed it like, be an empathetic husband to my wife. I'll call her Eleanor. So Eleanor, and so she talks to it and says, I'm having a difficult time at work. There's a problem with my boss, and the AI says, Eleanor, I'm really sorry to hear that. That must really hurt. Do you want to talk about that? And she's pointing at the phone saying, this is what I need you to be like. This is what I need you to be like. And he's like, no, perfect. I'll go watch the baseball. Right. And I'll leave you with the AI husband.
You can use this for as long as you want, honey. It's $20 a month. I got it.
That's right. You just go to the basement. And so, but behind the sort of humor of that is that actually there may well be slightly different things that men and women are on average looking for from relationships. And part of the challenge and the beauty of every human culture has been to find ways to bring us into this really kind of wonderful relationship with each other, or we do meet different needs, etc., over the course of a relationship. And then you start to worry, well, how much of that can be contracted out to AIs? And I think that's a big problem potentially.
It is. And people, they'll say, I don't really think that's going to happen. And I think, okay, well, I tell them the following, and maybe you can disagree with me on this example here, but imagine that your friend is dating someone and they don't really like them that much, but they're in a relationship. It's the first girl that he's dated for this long, and there's so many things wrong with that relationship, and they both see it. But they don't break up because they don't want to be alone. So what is he not doing? He's not going out and meeting new people. He's not really working on his social skills for meeting new people. He's not really raising his standards much above where he's at with her. He's just complaining about the
atrophying, basically.
Right.
He's atrophying, yeah.
Yes. So what if he's not in a relationship with a girlfriend? What if he's in a relationship with an AI? He's got the exact same set of problems, except for he's got no reason and no motivation to go out to a bar with his buddies and get rejected or laughed at, or maybe just not talked to by the girl that he liked. Why deal with that, right? You have to constantly be charging into battle almost socially until you get good at it, and then you start to enjoy it. But if you never make it through that developmental phase, you probably won't ever be able to do that comfortably.
Yeah, I think it's also part of a deeper challenge, which is that we have to get good at rejection, and we have to get good at failure, and that's how you build resilience. And if you retreat into this AI or online world, you don't get rejected, right? Your AI girlfriend does not reject you, whereas in real life, the real women and real girls are going to reject you. You're going to ask them out and they're going to say no. And that's just part of life. And you're going to apply for jobs and you're not going to get them. And you're going to work hard and you're not going to get a good grade. And you're going to take an exam and you're going to fail it. And I just think it's part of a broader issue, which is that kind of rejection breeds resilience. And that's just as true in romantic life as it is in the other. And then you lose the skills. I think in the end, this kind of comes down to it, like you were saying, you end up being de-skilled, and then it's a vicious cycle because you don't have good skills around other people and kind of women especially, and so it's worse, and you're very sensitive to rejection, and so you get rejected and you think, I'm done, right? One girl says no, right? You ask a girl out and then next thing, incel, AI, right, basement, end if you're not careful, because it's like risky. It's risky, right? I mean, it's a risky business. I remember first time asking a girl out in school. Terrifying. Oh my God, your heart's in your mouth. You can't. I mean, right? So and then of course she said no. In fact, a mate of mine, a mate of mine and I did it together. We asked two girls out. They were both called Debbie. Okay. And so we asked both of them out. It was just coincidence. They were best friends, but they're called Debbie. So we were going to ask them out together, right? Because we were so terrified. So we thought we'll ask them out on a double date. So we got doubly rejected because they both said no to both. They both said no to both of us. Brutal. But you
never recovered. That's yeah.
That's right. I've never recovered.
That's right. Dang. All jokes aside, what are some of the long-term consequences of neglecting these issues for both men and society as a whole? Because, I mean, this could affect future generations, societal cohesion. I know I might sound like I'm overstating it, but if people sort of siphon off too much, I mean, that's a really big problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of more sort of straightforward problems, which are like we're just leaving too much skill on the table. We're not making good use of our men. If they're not in the workforce, that's bad for the economy. All the usual arguments that you'd expect a kind of policy type scholar to make. Also, family life just is harder. I mean, if men's wages aren't going up, then what we're seeing is that kind of women are having to kind of pick up more of that, and that's good in some ways, but also like we should be sharing that. But I think you're pointing towards a potential longer-term cultural problem. And it's too early to say yet whether we're going to become South Korea, where there's such a huge divide now between young men and young women that the fertility rate has cratered. You're seeing dating market is in shambles, also very reactionary politics taking over, where it's kind of almost like a simmering gender war basically between. And you're seeing us trending in that direction where you're seeing political polarization, the dating market's not working well. There's a lot of blame being flung around between young men and young women. So in the long run, has consequences, of course, just for the men themselves, right? If a man ends up, despairing or taking his life, or not having a purposeful, flourishing life, that's just bad. Period. It's bad for women because they want, generally, men, if they're going to create families, they want strong, flourishing, good, interesting, men. But I also think that there's a danger that we start to see family formation really being affected. I'll be honest about this. I've been saying for quite a long time now that the declining fertility rate, changes in dating, we're fine. A lot of people, to be fair, a lot more conservatives have been ringing the alarm bell on this for quite a long time. I'm now pretty worried about it. We're about to publish some data showing that 15 to 24-year-olds are much less likely to say they want to have kids than any previous generation.
I believe that.
Much less likely. I mean, it's only happening now. Now, they might think they might change their mind, etc. And, I mentioned the loneliness stuff before, the dating problems. And so I actually think that if we don't find ways to lift up men, young men, help them educationally, help them economically, just help them in their personal life, just to be kind of like as awesome as they can be, I think we're going to have fewer kids. I think we're going to have fewer families. And I think that's bad for everybody, bad for the economy, bad for women, bad for men. And so I honestly would not have said this even probably 2 years ago, Jordan, but as I see the data coming in politically, culturally, economically, I didn't used to say there was a crisis, right? I don't use the word crisis, right? I think I might start to now, because I'm looking at these numbers and I'm looking at what's happening to a lot of our young men. I'm saying we have got to get ahead of this. We've got to get ahead of this. We're reaching some tipping points if we don't get ahead of this.
I think that makes, one, that's alarming, and two, it completely makes sense and jibes with just the anecdote. I always ask my younger cousins and friends and show fans questions like this, and I don't think any of them have said they want a kid. Some of the more sort of conservative or religious people are like, yeah, I want to have 5 kids because I grew up in a family of 8. And it's like, oh, you're only having 5? It's one of those. But my cousins and stuff, they're like, no, why would I have kids? My life is really good right now. And I hope they change their mind. But when I was 20-something, I said, yes, definitely, I want to have kids. So did my wife. She was always like, yeah, I definitely want to do this. My parents were, quite similar. I just... With a lot of this, I think it's hard to update our beliefs to match the new facts at hand. So I can see a lot of people just saying, well, there's still so much work to do with racial equality and with women's rights, and they are correct on that. But I think it's hard to say men need help and then sort of update our belief structure to match that.
Partly because it's changed quickly, right? I think that, like we were saying a while ago, like it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. It's honestly one of the reasons I ended up having it. Like, a lot of people just said, look, you can't do this. I'm like, look, I'm very boring. I have charts. At the time, I'm a Brookings scholar. For the love of God, like, if I can't talk about this, who can talk about it? I mean, like, I'm serious. Like, the more people said I shouldn't talk about it, the more I thought, really? Wow, I must talk about it. Because, like, if we're not having this conversation in good faith about real problems, I hope by now we've kind of persuaded enough people kind of listening about this. There's real stuff happening. This is not made up, right? The men's rights movement is not making up problems that are a real problem. And that if we don't talk about them and address them, it's not like somebody else won't be talking about them. That's what happens, as you said a while ago. Like, if you neglect problems, they turn into grievances and problems. So I get it, the sort of tiny violin, are you kidding me, eye roll thing. I understand that instinct, but we've got to get past it. I honor that instinct. We've got to get past it. If we don't talk about it, someone else is going to be talking about it. Yes, do we need, there's only 25, we need more women in politics. Yes, we need more women CEOs. Yes, we need to close the gender pay gap. Yes, we need to reduce violence against women. Yes, we need more capital. Only about 3% of venture capital money goes to female founders. Is that a problem? It's a huge problem. Should we be doing stuff about that? We are. But by the way, we are doing quite a lot about those problems, and we still need to do more. And we can tackle these problems of boys and men. Anybody who says that we have to choose between them, people on the left saying, well, we have to focus on women, can't focus on men, that's not sensible. People on the right who say, yeah, we should focus on men. Time to ignore all this feminism stuff for women. It's all, quotes, gone too far. Right? Not our friend. The people I admire, people like the now former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who said, I have a son and a daughter. I'm worried about both of them. I care about both of them. And as a society, that's how we have to think about this. It's and, not or. And right now, too much of our politics, especially around gender, is being framed as or. Pick a side, pink or blue, left or right. Insane. And it's got us to a very difficult place in our culture. And so we've just all got to give ourselves permission to care about boys and men, to advocate for boys and men, to help boys and men, without living in fear of the fact that in doing that, we've somehow gone over to the dark side and become a misogynist. That is not true. And it's more of us that say that, the less true it will become.
Richard Reeves, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.